Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and we return to the Marvel series for one of its more impactful storylines, at least as far as one planet's concerned. I'm your host, Nathan P. Butler. These are issues released between April and June of 1983. You'll find the storyline we're going to focus on here today in the pages of Marvel issue number 74, entitled The Iskalon Effect, from April of 1983. Number 75, called Title, from May of 1983, right? Same month as the release of Return of the Jedi in theaters. And we have R2-D2 to the Rescue, which sounds like it could be the beginning of a storyline on the Clone Wars cartoon series here. And this is from June of 1983. It's a three-part storyline. You can also, of course, find it these days in the pages of Star Wars Omnibus Volume 4 for a long time ago. The story begins on the planet Iskalon, essentially a water planet where oceans are all over the place, with the exception of a very small sort of a port area called Pavilion. It's an area where air breathers can land, and there's an elevator that takes them down into some tunnels that are glassed off underneath the ocean floor. But for the most part, the people of Iskalon, the Iskalonians, are aquatic. They're not quite as fish-looking, you might say, as with the Mon Calamari. They're more humanoid in the appearance of their faces, but they are another race of sea-dwelling sentient beings. They're like a school of fish in the sense that they tend to act as a collective a lot of times, following whoever the leader is supposed to be at the time. And because of being sort of in this open environment and open with each other, they really have little in terms of a sense of subterfuge or lying or cheating. They're very open about their, what we would think of as secrets, things that they would keep personal. They pretty much share with whoever. They have very little sense of privacy in that regard. Now, our heroes have come here on a search for information that is apparently vital to the rebellion. You may recall in the last issue of the Marvel series Last Bane, we learned that Yam Argo and Tay Vanis, these two rebel pilots, had gathered information but then been lost. Argo had crashed on the planet Last Bane. We saw what became of that in the last issue where they were able to get his tapes. But they need information from Tay Vanis, not knowing where he or his droid happened to be. So, they've come to Iskalon because this system is where Tay Vanis has been tracked to. And essentially there are three different planets of importance in this system. Now we have the planet Iskalon, already mentioned, the water world. We have the planet Gamondar, where there's an Imperial base in a place called Fortress, a fortress called Fortress. And we have the planet Telfrey. I always forget how to pronounce that. Telfrey, which has been essentially destroyed. When there were rumblings of rebel activity here, and the Empire right now is working on a secret weapons project there on the planet. When there were rumblings of rebel activity, the Empire struck decisive blows. They subjugated the planet Gamondar, took it under their control, and set up Fortress. Meanwhile, they sent TIE fighters and bombed the living crap out of Telfrey, essentially decimating the population there. They set an example of conquering. They set an example of wiping out a population. Iskalon is the one that is somewhat left untouched. Only what we'll find is that one of the things that they are working on at Fortress is a missile to set up what's called the Iskalon effect. Iskalon is a planet essentially of water. It's a missile. You fire the missile, it goes into the ocean, it explodes. With this massive explosion, you get tidal waves that can devastate the entire populace of huge regions of that planet because the waves just keep going and going and going. And especially any solid structures like Pavilion, right, made for the air breathers, can be destroyed by such a blast. So they're really, using this system as an example to other systems, what happens when you get out of line with the Empire. So they figured out that Tay Vanis has been there, and they meet with the leader of this society, known as Primor. A Primor, kind of orange-skinned here. He is their leader. His son is there as well, named Monet. Okay? And we meet, along with Monet, his wife, Kendall. Kendle, not like the ebook reader. And this is sort of the royal family of the time. We get to see them talking. A lot of their conversation was witnessed by an Imperial spy, who they don't really think much of as he's walking around as another air breather. They learned what has happened on the other planets and such. They realize that Tay Vanis had actually been fighting on Yavin years ago. It's just that, they didn't really know him. They couldn't know everybody who was there. So they feel that sort of personal connection to them at this point. And they realize that Teyvanis went on a mission. Actually, Yam was with them as well. Tay and Yam went on a mission to Fortress, taking his droid, taking Teyvanis' droid with him. And the idea is that Teyvanis may still be there, or the droid may still be there. If they can get either one of them, they can get the information that they need. So Monet says his farewells to his wife Kindle. These Iskalonians can leave the planet if they have these helmets on that keep water in, as long as they keep the water somewhat fresh. And we see these characters go off on a mission to Gamendar, but not all of them. They need to be people that the Empire may not recognize as easily. So it's Lando, it is Chewbacca, it's C-3PO and R2-D2, and it's Monet, who take the Millennium Falcon and fly it to Gamendar. And they might say, why the Millennium Falcon? They might recognize it. They go under the cover that Monet has bought the Millennium Falcon for trading and such. So at this point, the assumption is the Millennium Falcon, yeah, that's an important ship to the Empire, but it's not being flown by who it usually would have been. He's on ice, he's in carbonite, so obviously Han Solo and the Rebel Alliance, it's not an obvious connection for the ship, at least not in this particular era. Unfortunately, this Imperial spy has been tipped off by someone on Iskalon, and this spy then goes and lets the Imperials on Fortress know exactly what has been happening on the planet. He also lets them know, of course, that of those left behind, Luke and Leia were among them, these major rebel leaders. Now, with word having reached Fortress that there is rebel activity on Iskalon, the leader of the Imperial base, Fortress, a guy named Admiral Tower, decides to fire off the missile and launch the so-called Iskalon effect. It almost hits the Millennium Falcon on the way, splashes down into the water, and kaboom, we get a massive, massive explosion and huge tidal waves. And at this point, Luke and Leia are without most of their breathing gear. She's got her breathing gear. He doesn't have his on him at the time. The glass walls crash, they shatter, and we spend a big chunk of the next issue trying to get Luke and Leia to safety through the water. And they are helped along the way by a man they think is trying to kill them, named Kiro. Kiro will become a huge player in the Marvel series post-Return of the Jedi. So keep an eye out, Kiro will be back a lot. When they finally get to the surface, Kiro reveals, look, Kindle, she has betrayed you to the Empire. Why are you resisting me? I'm the one that's trying to help you. She's the one who has betrayed you. She's let the Empire know what's going on. And sure enough, no matter what Lando does to disguise himself with an eye patch and whatnot, no matter how covert they tend to be and whatever cover story they're using about wanting to buy droids and such, when they eventually find K3PX, who is supposedly Teyvanis' droid, turns out it's a trap thanks to Kindle and the Empire, and sure enough, just as our heroes are realizing the truth back on Iskalon about the fact that they've been betrayed, we wind up jumping and seeing that our heroes on Gamendar have all been zapped, except for R2-D2, who took off and pretended to join a work detail. They've been dumped into a cell. And aside from just the fact that that's bad news as it is, if you don't get fresh water for Monet, he could wind up actually dying at some point. Turns out K3PX is a spy there for Darth Vader. It's a trap. It's a trap for any rebels that come looking for Teyvanis and whatnot. And K3PX reports back to Vader, lets him know that the Iskalon effect has been used, lets him know that Luke Skywalker was among the rebels said to have been on Iskalon when it went off. Vader is angry as hell because he thinks that Luke Skywalker may be dead, and that's a bigger issue than anything else the Empire has going at the moment as far as he is concerned. So he heads off to Gamendar himself to see what's going on in this system. Meanwhile, Luke and Leia and Kiro try to survive on the surface, fighting against the big creatures that we will wind up seeing pretty frequently called the Chiaki, anytime that we're on Iskalon. And they also wind up getting attacked by Iskalonians led by Kindle, which are that group mind, that follow the leader of the school type thought process, because of course she's trying to wipe them out because she's made that deal with the Empire that she and her husband will live when everything is being subjugated so long as they hook up with the Empire in order to do it. Fortunately, Vader's actions kind of step in our hero's favor here when K3PX brings Vader's orders to detain and arrest Admiral Tower. Once Tower is arrested, he is brought before Vader. Vader reveals that he should not have done what he did, that he should not have launched the Iskalon effect without asking Vader first, etc., etc. And at the end of the transmission, I love kind of the finality of this. You have Tower saying, Lord Vader, back in the detention area, there are some rebel prisoners. Perhaps one of them could be... And Vader says, the man I seek is not among them. Whoever they are, they shall keep until my return. Guards, execute Admiral Tower. Transmission ends. So we assume that Tower is being blasted as soon as that transmission cuts off. Fortunately, while this is distracting Tower and the Imperials, R2-D2 is able to get into the computer system, unlock the cell door, get them out of there, and give instructions to the computer that no ships are to bother the Millennium Falcon when it leaves. So they're able to leave, get off the planet, but this has been somewhat of a wild goose chase, because while Tayvanis and Yam Argo had at one point been there, this droid is not the droid they're looking for, so to speak. It was a trap. Back on the planet, fortunately, when Kiro is injured, his glass helmet thing is shattered. Luke steps in, saves his life, and just as they're about to be killed by one of those big Chiakis, the Millennium Falcon swoops in, blasts it, and they bring back Monet. But when it's blasted, it falls and conveniently squashes Kindle, the traitor. Upon arriving back, Monet takes charge of his civilization. He is now the leader because Primor, his father, the leader, has been killed in the Iskalon effect. Only he has to do what's best for the school, and no matter how closely he wants to ally himself with our heroes, he says, Luke, Lando, we must say farewell now. And when you return to the planets of the air breathers, tell your fellow rebels that none of them is welcome here. I am the son of Primor, and the school will follow me. I shall lead it into the depths. There shall be no more pavilions, no more tanks, no more living in two worlds, not so long as there is an empire. And as our heroes watch, they swim off into the sea. They've lost potentially an ally here, though Kiro will wind up having second thoughts about what his people are doing, but that's not till later on in the saga. It's a fun story. Honestly, I think it's one of the tighter stories of this era of Star Wars publishing. It really drives home the idea that we need to find Tayvanis, need to find his information, even though we don't know what it is. It introduces the Iskalonians. In particular, it introduces Kiro. Big story in the grand scheme of things here, and you feel the peril of Luke and Leia when they're the only air breathers left on this planet, when the surface dweller area, the tubes and everything, are being destroyed by the tidal wave. I think it's a better story than we get in a lot of the stories around this era, though most of them are pretty tight. I would say Mary Jo Duffy's era is probably my favorite of the era of the Marvel Comics. Hers and David Michelinie's are the two best eras of this time, though I would still say Mary Jo Duffy's goes one up because it not only introduces this stuff, but also takes us after Return of the Jedi. So, is this an essential read? I would say, for a Marvel reader, yes. We need to know about the search for Tayvanis. Yeah, what happens on Gamandar is not that big a deal because it was a wild goose chase, but we need to meet the Iskalonians, we need to meet Kiro, so that we can understand some things that will happen after the events of Return of the Jedi. Is it essential in the grand scheme of things for Star Wars readers? I would say no. Because again, this story in and of itself, it introduces some important elements, but it in and of itself is not a massive boom hit to the continuity that ripples into other things, right? It has no Iskalon effect of its own in the grand scheme of things, but it certainly does for the Marvel series. How's that for a nice tie-in of the concept there? With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.